checked as a
Johnny, Norma, and Jack.
Working?
God, what was his wife's name? They were the ones that.
Okay, it is 6 o'clock. We will call the special meeting, May 24th of the County Board to order. This time, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, if you haven't pushed your attendance button, now time to do it. And we will call the roll.
Roll call shows 2 county board supervisors absent, Supervisor Peterson and Supervisor Berg.
All right, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
Supervisor Flater makes a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, Supervisor Flater, is there a second?
Supervisor Bishel seconds.
Supervisor Bishel seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, then we will call the vote. And again, use your buttons. Okay.
If you don't.
Okay. All set?
18 yes, 0 no.
Okay. Agenda is approved. Members of the public wishing to be heard? Seeing none, then we will move on to reports. Randy, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, I'll give just a brief introduction if that's okay. Just kind of stage and how this training came about. So your table of contents, this shows the introduction, what we're going to be reviewing, really the difference between a forensic review and internal control review. Forensic internal control review completed, and then the American Rescue Plan they're helping us with. Fraud prevention training, which some of that will be tonight, and then I'll have Jim Sullivan come up and actually do the training. So back in 2018, I attended a training put on by Stickage that had to do with fraud. It was a case, I believe it was in Illinois, which was millions and millions of dollars, which of course gets everybody's attention, but really what got my attention was I was sitting at a table with 6 other municipal, either administrators or leaders of some sort, and everyone had a story about a fraud. And then I started thinking, yes, I do have a story about a fraud. So that's really what got my attention is, hey, we really need to do a deeper dive than what our normal audit is. Our normal audit, they do good work, but this forensic audit is much deeper than that. So there's also been some news in the media around here for surrounding counties having issues with fraud. And then Stickage really concentrates in 3 areas: the technical solutions, accounting and tax audit, and then advisory. And that's really what we're using them for: advisory, doing forensic audits, and then doing some training. So what is forensic review, internal control review? What is that? So a forensic internal control review is where an independent firm reviews a sample of financial transactions such as accounts payable, P-card transactions, and payroll processes. During this review, county staff from departments wherein the different financial processes occurred are interviewed, and other department processes are reviewed to ensure compliance with approval procedures or policies, and also determine the proper internal controls are in place. This review is completed in addition to our annual audit, like I talked about. This is the deep dive. This is, when you hear forensic, that means they could take an invoice, follow that all the way through the process, ask questions to any staff member. The first one in 2019 was a surprise because obviously I couldn't tell anybody that we're doing a forensic audit because they're going to hide stuff, right? So I sprung this on my financial team when Sickage showed up to do the audit. As you can imagine, they weren't happy with that, which I don't blame them, but it's really the only way we could do it to make sure the integrity of the audit was in place. So we did that. They did a great job. They came through with flying colors. We did 2 additional audits. Obviously, our plan was to continue that, and we all know what happened in 2020. In 2021, we did Human Services Department and then Land Conservation Forest Management. Human Services, huge department, a lot of money flowing in and out, a lot of different sources. Land Conservation, we knew there was going to be retirement in there. It's always a good idea to look at the books before that happens to make sure there's no concerns. Again, both departments came through with flying colors. There was recommendations. You're always going to have recommendations. That's their job. We implemented many of those as we could. A lot of times what happens with these audits is you just don't have enough bodies to have the controls that you really would love to have in place. It's just not possible. And smaller counties, obviously I came from a smaller county, you have less of those. But we do everything we can to have checks and balances as we move through our processes. So our staff has done a great job. And then Chippewa County is also contracting Sickage for, and I've talked about this before, about our ARPA compliance. Again, ARPA, extremely complicated. The only thing that was constant with it, it continuously changed. So they have experts on staff that, obviously we read a lot of the ARPA stuff, but they're the ones that did the deep dive and everything that came out, which is a full-time job, essentially. So they're the ones that we're going to send the final plan to, make sure we're in compliant with that it qualifies our ARPA, and then how to report the final plan. So they'll be doing that as we move forward. And then the fraud prevention training, obviously county board tonight, department heads, managers, cash handlers will do that, and then all their staff. And then Jim, I'm sure, will talk about some of the fraud prevention training that Sickage does. Again, to me, it was more, I think the big fraud was kind of the hook that kind of got everybody to the training, but talking to the 5-6 people on my table, and every one of them having 1 or 2 incidents that happened either in a township, a county, a city, that really, got my interest. So I was really glad to see that our forensic audit came through with flying colors, so that was good. If there's no questions for me, I'll have Jim come up, and then we can answer any questions at the end. Any questions for me right now? All right, Jim.
Okay, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jim Sullivan. I'm from Sickage. Sickage is a professional services firm. We have an office outside Milwaukee and Brookfield, Wisconsin. We have a lot of offices throughout Illinois, Akron, Ohio. We're now in Washington, D.C., and Florida, and some other states. And we work nationally on a variety of services. Randy explained technology, audit, accounting, and tax, and then advisory services or consulting, and that's the area I work in. So Randy said we're going to be doing 3 trainings. Mary and I will do a tape of training for administrators and another one for staff. Mary is a very seasoned fraud examiner, and she's been with Sickage for quite a while now. I joined Sickage about 8 years ago. I came from the public sector. I started my career as a prosecutor in Chicago. Got into the Inspector General field. Inspector Generals investigate allegations of waste, fraud, financial mismanagement, and employee misconduct. I was kept quite busy because I worked for the city of Chicago and then the Chicago Public Schools. I retired from the Chicago Public Schools in 2014, serving 12 years as the Inspector General. I am not an auditor. I am not an accountant. I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm more of an investigator. It's like Randy explained. We do the digging. I work with accountants who can do their spreadsheets and line things up, and we corroborate and do some digging into things. This isn't just a high-level review. We dive into things, we look at things we think are suspicious or could be suspicious or that pose a risk to the organization. So just a little bit about what we'll talk tonight. I'll try not to take up too much of your time. I know you've been through a lot of trainings, I assume. We'll talk about some fraud basics, which really are just some statistics from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and just an understanding of internal controls, who's responsible, and what the objectives are, what an effective internal control framework looks like, how to respond to a fraud incident, and then we'll talk quickly about some ethics. So just some fraud basics, and again, these stats come from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and Mary and I are both, and Kate, who works on our team as well on these projects, we are all certified fraud examiners through the ACFE. So this is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Explains there's 3 different kinds of fraud. There's asset misappropriation, which is taking things, whether it's money, property. Okay, then there's financial statement fraud, which is less frequent, and then your corruption. Okay, so asset misappropriation occurs most often. Again, that's people taking money and property of the organization or the governmental entity they work for or are affiliated with. The ACFE tells us when fraud occurs, these are the behavioral red flags exhibited by the fraudsters. And this comes from a survey the ACFE does to CFEs like myself and Mary. And then we respond to the survey and give some stats about, answer questions about the frauds we've worked on in the last year or 2. So obviously the lead ones are financial trouble, people living beyond their means, people in financial difficulties. But look as well, wheeler-dealer attitude at 13%. So that's just people trying to be the big shot, right? The wheeler-dealer attitude. So they're going to circumvent controls and commit fraud because they're the wheeler-dealer. Also, peer pressure is also up there. So peer pressure, and you're going to see this a lot in a political environment. People want to get things done. They're under pressure, circumvent controls to get things done. That may not be the right way to go about things. So when people commit fraud, these 3 things are also present: pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. So think about it. You can't control the pressure people are under. Financial trouble, the need to get things done, okay? You can't control how people rationalize their conduct. I can do this because, I'm really underpaid. Or there's so much money, nobody's gonna miss it, okay? I'm due this. That's their rationalization. What you can control is the opportunity people see to commit and get away with their fraud. So even a fraudster is going to do a risk assessment, which we'll talk about. Even a fraudster is going to do a risk assessment to think, can I do this? How am I going to get caught? Can I get away with it? Okay? So that's what you can control, is the opportunity people see to commit and get away with fraud. So you reduce the risk of fraud by implementing effective controls. And the objectives of internal controls, especially in local government, is to operate effectively, achieve your goals. What's your purpose? Efficiently, make the best use of your probably limited resources, right? Provide reliable information to those who need it, and you have to comply with any number of laws, regulations, contractual obligations. ARPA, like Randy mentioned, has any number of regulations you have to follow. And you have to provide a reasonable assurance that you're getting the job done, you're using your resources to the best of your ability. So who's responsible for internal controls? The ACFE tells us it's management's job to ensure proper controls are in place. And the other organization is COSO, Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Many years ago, a group of accountants, basically, internal auditors, accountants, government accountants got together, and they came up with what we'll talk about in a minute, an effective internal control framework, and they dealt a lot in internal controls. So internal controls is a process affected by an entity's board of directors, management, and other personnel designed to provide reasonable assurance, again, regarding the achievement of objectives relating to operations, reporting, and compliance. So who's responsible? Randy is responsible. He's primarily responsible. We'll put everything on Randy, right? He's responsible for internal control. He works with management for implementation of internal control policies, but ultimately, it's the governing board, the county board, ultimately responsible for internal controls. So there's different kinds of auditors. There's internal auditors. Larger governmental agencies will have a distinct internal audit function that reports to the board or the CEO. They assist management in meeting its internal control responsibility. They will devise an audit plan. Where's our risk? What do we want to look into? Are the procedures appropriate here to reduce the risk? Your external auditors, and I think you guys are CLA, Clifton Larson, your external auditors are going to take a higher level look and give an opinion on the fair presentation of financial statements, okay? They do not do a deep dive. You have $80 million budget, give or take? $100 million budget. So external auditors are concerned with materiality. So when they're looking at things, they want to see if there's anything material, anything that materially affects the financial statements. And for materiality and a $100 million budget, it's a lot of money, okay? They are not going to get into things that might be a $10,000 or $20,000 theft, okay? They're only going to deal at a very high level. Your audit committee or an executive committee assists the governing body, which is county board, in meeting its internal control responsibility. So that could be a committee of you folks that take on some internal control responsibility and work with Randy. So CLA gives you a clean opinion. Okay, your financial statements are fairly represented. That doesn't mean there's not fraud being committed. If it did, I would be out of work. Okay, every place I go to has, for the most part, has a clean opinion. Okay, and I've worked on recently, just finished a $2 million theft. Okay, and before that, we worked on a 7, maybe, can't prove 12, but at least $7 million theft where those organizations had clean audit opinions, okay? So don't think that just because you get a clean audit opinion means there's not theft. So to reduce the risk of theft, you try to implement internal controls. COSO tells us these are the 5 elements that are present with an effective internal control framework. The control environment, which is the tone at the top. Okay? The board and administration sets the tone of moral and ethical conduct, and that procedures are going to be followed. There's a risk assessment. It means what could possibly prevent us from achieving our objectives? What could stand in the way? And you have to consider fraud when you do a risk assessment. Is there a risk that fraud could be committed here? Control activities are the controls that are put in place, implemented through, hopefully, documented policies and procedures which clearly identify procedures and each person's role and responsibility in those procedures. Information and communication is telling people what their responsibilities are, training people, informing people, all stakeholders in and outside the organization, what the rules are, what the procedures are. And monitoring is taking a look at your controls over time. Does this work? Can something be more effective? Do we need to tweak this control? Do we need to implement new controls? And you guys have done that with the work we've done with Randy, which would cover both the risk assessment, control activities, trainings, and the monitoring. So there's some other slides in there that get a little more detail on those 5 elements. You have them. You take a look at them, just a little more robust explanation of a control environment, a risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. And if you have, please, if you have any questions, raise your hand. I'd like to answer questions. I'm sure you don't want to sit there and hear me ramble for a while here. Okay, so just again, some essential points. Internal controls are people, policies, and documented procedures. I have to stress, you're a relatively small county, okay? I've done work at school districts that are much bigger than your county and have a much bigger budget, okay? So you're relatively small government. You cannot rely on trust as an internal control, okay? There has to be a procedure in place. There has to be, in essence, two eyes on something. Something has to be checked. You can't rely on one person to do too many things, okay? The $2 million theft I just worked on, very trusted employee, very trusted employee. And when we did our work following the discovery of the theft, well, we trusted him. We trusted him. The $7 million theft, again, very trusted, given much more responsibility than her 25-hour-a-week job should have gotten, okay? I'm trying to scare you, that's all, okay? Again, the primary responsibilities with the county administrator, you folks are ultimately responsible. The finance director can serve the purpose of an internal audit and work with the county administrator to assist management in fulfilling their responsibility. Again, you have to give a reasonable assurance that things are going according to plan and you're achieving your objectives. And it's a good policy that there has to be a credible way for those inside and outside the organization to communicate any information they may have concerning the circumvention of controls. And we'll talk about that right now. So that's how do you respond to an incident, okay? I have my job, and I stay fairly busy because this happens all the time, okay? Randy was at that training, and people sat at a table, and they all had fraud stories, okay? Randy has a fraud story. Your neighboring county has a fraud story, okay? I can be here till midnight with fraud stories, okay? So and when I do these trainings, I tell folks, if it hasn't happened to you recently, it will. That's just the society we live in. Whether it's somebody cheating time to somebody stealing $1 million, it's going to happen. So what happens? How do you respond to an incident? Here's some more stats to help understand what we're going to talk about. So again, this is from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Fraud is initially detected 43% of the time through a tip, okay? And another large percent of cases, about 37%, if my math is right, comes from internal audit, management review, account reconciliation, document examination, and monitoring. So another 37% of fraud is initially detected through some other form of active review. Okay? So you have to have some active review, and you have to be able to receive and evaluate tips. How do you do that? Through a hotline. My understanding is you guys have something similar in place. You are way ahead of the game with that. A fraud hotline gives the people stakeholders the ability to confidentially and anonymously report something. Who better knows what's going on than the people who work next to the person who's stealing, next to the person who's maybe exhibiting those behavioral red flags that are present when fraud occurs, okay? So how does that information get communicated? Through some type of fraud hotline, okay? But it's important that those people who communicate issues are not retaliated against, okay? So that's what a whistleblower is, okay? You have to receive the information and not take any action against the person reporting that. May even want to consider a duty to report misconduct in your code of conduct, okay? Make people responsible for reporting what they see. Just some stats why fraud hotlines are important. In the survey the ACFE conducts every 2 years, 64% of the victim organizations had hotlines. So even a hotline is not going to stop things, but it will likely reduce your loss and likely reduce the duration of the theft. Because people have the means to report it. You're probably detecting it earlier if you have a fraud hotline. I worked at Chicago Public Schools. I was the inspector general there for 12 years. I worked there for 15 years. Some of the biggest cases, and I mean cases that led to federal indictments, other criminal charges locally, came from anonymous tips. Okay? So if you have a means to receive and evaluate those tips, again, you're ahead of the game. You guys have anonymous feedback link on your website, and the county administrator plans to add a quick link. Maybe he's already done that, I'm not sure. On the finance page of the county's website, which will also be sent to the county administrator as the anonymous feedback line. Okay, so you have a means to receive tips. What happens when you receive a tip? What are you going to do with it? So it's better to think things through in advance and have a protocol in place. So when a tip comes in, it's not, oh my God, what are we going to do now? Okay, here's our plan. When a tip comes in, we have a protocol in place. We're going to evaluate the tip. We're going to see if it's credible, if it needs to be investigated. We have to make sure whoever investigates it is not conflicted, and we have to keep this as confidential as possible. So have a plan in place, so when things happen, you follow your protocol. Okay? So here, that protocol will be managed by the county administrator. Again, decide who will investigate. It's not always practical, and it's not always the right answer to just turn things over to the county sheriff, okay? Especially in smaller jurisdictions, law enforcement may not always be the answer. They may not be trained to investigate things like $1 million theft or purchasing or vendor fraud, okay? And there's other issues of bringing in law enforcement as well. You need to be able to preserve evidence. You need to decide if immediate action is warranted, like administrative leave. Again, if you've thought these things through in advance and have a protocol in place, certain kinds of allegations, we're going to have to put this person on administrative leave, okay, based on the seriousness of it. Okay? This decision has already been made. You've already agreed to that. The protocol's in place. Who's going to interview witnesses and subjects? Who's going to evaluate evidence presented to the fact finder, whoever that is, the county administrator or the board? And how are you going to respond to the media, okay? Doesn't an organization look very professional, since you are going to be victimized by it, okay? You will at some point. If you can simply say we have a protocol in place, we've evaluated the complaint that's been made, and it's being investigated, okay? As opposed to, oh my God, what are we going to do now, kind of thing, okay? So understand if there's a media response needed, and what that response will be. So again, just be prepared, think things through in advance. Who's going to respond to the complaint? What are your procedures? Does this complaint need to be investigated? How are we going to get evidence? Who's going to do the investigation? Who's going to conduct the interviews? Who's going to evaluate the evidence, analyze it? What's the conclusion going to be? And at the end, what happened here that let this get through? It is a fraud. What happened? Let's go back and look at our controls in this area. Do they need to be tightened up? Okay? Regardless of the controls that are in place, any entity can have somebody who's just going to do something, right? You can't stop that, right? People are just going to do stuff. Okay? So do our controls need to be enhanced in these areas? So the code of ethics we'll just talk about fairly quickly. There's three rules or laws, I guess we'll call them: the Chippewa County Code of Ordinances, Wisconsin statutes, and then the criminal penalty, the criminal statute at the bottom there. So again, I'm sure you've been told this. The basis of ethical conduct is not to put yourself in a position different than the general public, okay? Not to have a conflict of interest, not to benefit from the work of the government. So Chippewa County's policy, the goals are public confidence in the integrity of government, independent, impartial, and responsible to the people. Decisions are made through proper channels, right? Follow the process. Don't use your office for personal gain, or people within the government aren't using their office for their personal gain. You don't have an economic interest in the decisions of government, and you're avoiding conflicts, even the appearance of conflicts, okay? That can hurt you as much as an actual conflict. So some definitions are provided: anything of value, money, property, favors, service, payment, advance, forbearance, promise of future employment. Financial interest could be direct or indirect, indirect being a little more attenuated than you and your wife and your kids. Immediate family is defined as spouse, children, stepchildren, parents, or other legal relation who supports or receives more than one half support. A person could be an individual, a corporation, a partnership, a joint venture, an association or organization that the official or employee belongs to or is part of. So some conflicts described would be, again, financial gain. Personal or immediate family or associated organization is gaining. Direct or indirect solicitation or acceptance of anything of value if reasonably expected to influence official action. I come from Chicago. This is our way of life in Chicago, okay? People don't do anything. I mean, people engage in politicians to get something. It's what we do. Not me. It's what people do in Chicago. Okay? It's our religion down there, okay? In other words for it, pay to play, kickbacks, even bribery. Conflicts could be official actions substantially affecting a supervisor or immediate family member or associated organization, or misusing position to produce substantial, direct or indirect benefit to the supervisor or immediate family member. Okay? Again, getting a benefit from the work of the government. I like this one, whining and dining. People aren't taking you out to eat because, no offense, that you're a nice guy, okay? Or lady, okay? They want something in return, okay? That's whining and dining, okay? I worked on a case at Chicago Public Schools, the director of food services, who supervised a $35 million a year contract, was regularly taken out by the contractor. No, Jim, we're just friends, she said. And we go to high-end restaurants because I'm a foodie and I like to eat there, but he always pays. That's wrong, okay? You are managing his contract. Why is he taking you out to dinner? Okay? Similar to pay to play, same thing. So again, the state statute, very similar. Using your position for financial gain, whether it's yourself, your family, or associated organization. Taking something of value to influence your action. Pay to play. So the Wisconsin Code of Ethics for local government officials said no public official can take official action affecting a matter a member, family member, or associated organization has a substantial financial interest. No public official can use his position in a way that produces or assists in the production of a substantial benefit for a member, family member, or associated organization. If you do, you may have committed a Class 1 felony. Again, this is Wisconsin statute. As an officer, employee of a private company, negotiates, bids for, or enters into a contract with the public entity, and you participate as an officer or employee of the public entity, doing work with yourself. You're authorizing work with yourself, okay? And these are just a couple examples, the more blatant examples of, from the criminal statute. Participate in a contract in which the officer or employee has a pecuniary interest. There are some exceptions. That contract can't be more than $15,000 a year. Why? That always baffles me. In Illinois, we have a gift ban act that only prohibits gifts over $75 a day. What's the point, right? A gift is a gift. The other exception is not more than 2% of the stock, so you can have a deal with Microsoft as a county board member. If you have more than 2% of the stock, please let me know. I'll let you take me out to dinner today, okay? And there's another exception if the work is with a local committee or workforce development. Okay, I've kind of flown through these. You have the presentation. Like I said, we will be doing a more in-depth presentation for administrators and managers, and then also a presentation for staff as well. We're providing the Randy and Lori the tapes of those sessions. So if you have any questions, please ask. Kind of threw a lot at you quickly. Maybe you guys all understand this. I'm sure you do. If you have any other questions, or you just want me to tell war stories. So, yes, sir.
Do any of these organizations or ones that with the tips thing offer rewards?
I haven't seen any. Most of my work is in the public sector and not-for-profit, and they do not offer rewards. I haven't seen any. In the not-for-profit and government sector, I haven't seen any.
Use your buttons. Annette?
Supervisor Hunt, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. When I lived in DC, I took anti-terrorism, anti-spying class, and much of the motivation was similar to like the Robert Hansen case, where he was in financial straits and turned against the United States, even though he was a, I don't know, CIA dude or whatever.
I believe so.
Anyway, my question actually has to do with a risk manager. Have you seen in your work that having a position of a risk manager helps reduce fraud or doesn't make any difference?
So I would see, and again, most of the work we do is in financial issues. I haven't seen a risk manager. I have seen in larger organizations, and it's pretty rare. I mean, it was at the City of Chicago, it was at Chicago Public Schools. There's one, the second largest school district in Illinois has one, is performed by the internal auditor, okay? There are risk managers that deal more with other issues not related to financial stealing, I guess.
Right.
But we usually don't interact with them. But, I mean, you have a pretty, okay, I'm going to violate my trust thing. So you have a pretty good staff here that has gone through a couple exercises in having internal controls reviewed and risk assessments, and working together with the finance people. I think they can, those people can perform that function, at least in the financial area.
Okay.
But you should also test that periodically.
Certainly. Thank you.
Any other questions? Here, push my button to see if it works. I noticed in your document only 1% confessions.
Detected by confessions, yes.
Okay, seems
I mean, maybe confessions come later.
Okay.
But only 1%
are detected.
detected by confessions. I experienced that one time at Chicago Public Schools when the CEO called up and said, Jim, there's a guy coming over, he's a principal of a school, he's gonna confess to stealing like $50,000. And I'm like, what school? I don't have no information. So that there was something gonna happen, and he came forward ahead of it. So his school was about to be audited, not by an external audited, but by the internal audit function. He was worried they would catch it, so he came forward and got ahead of the game on that. So the more people know their work is going to be reviewed, that's a great internal control. That there's going to be another set of eyes on something, that periodically things are going to be tested to see if procedures were followed.
Okay.
This one might be a little bit askance here, but I was kind of curious as to how, once the investigator, the fraud investigator, does his investigation, does he then present it to the the prosecuting attorney in that jurisdiction then, or how does that interact?
So when I was in the public sector, we had that ability. Okay, we would present findings as appropriate, whether it was to federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, and obviously to the entity, whether it's City of Chicago or Chicago Public Schools. As a consultant, it's really up to the organization to determine how they want to handle it. I've brought cases since I've been at Sikich to both local law enforcement and federal law enforcement with the consent of the entity we were doing the work for. But it's really up to you folks then, if something is discovered, what's the next steps?
I would guess Mr. Pauls probably would have an idea how that works, so. Not asking you, I'm just giving you the credit.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. Thanks.
Okay, move on to B, American Rescue Plan Act, County Board brainstorming session.
Thank you. Just to finish that up, one of the things, obviously, it went around like wildfire that we had a forensic audit. So like you said, one of the prevention is knowing that that can happen. So we make it very evident that we could call on the forensic auditors at any time. So nobody has any idea when they're coming or what the game plan is. So but definitely a good deterrent. Okay, so the ARPA introduction background, I'll go through each one of these as we're moving forward. Again, I know some of you have heard this so many times you don't want to hear me speak anymore, but $1.9 trillion, Chippewa County received $12,559,059. Did we get the second, Not yet. We received the first one in May of 2021. We were supposed to get it in May of 2022. I guess they have a few days left, but we should be receiving the second half of that soon. Again, this is when it first came out. These are really the broad categories that it could be spent in. On May 10th, 2021, U.S. Treasury issued the interim final rule. Again, like I said before, I wish I went to really read it and waited for the final rule, but it was obviously a very hot topic. There are differences between the final rule and the interim rule that do get a little confusing sometimes still. On January 6, 2022, the U.S. Treasury released the final rule for ARPA, which is effective April 1st of 2022. So Chippewa County may use the funds to cover eligible costs that our organization incurred during the period that began on March 3rd, 2021 and ends December 31st, 2024. As long as the award funds for the obligations incurred by December 31st, 2024 are expanded by December 31st, 2026. So what that says is that we have to spend all our funds by December 31st, 2024, unless we have a contract with somebody to provide those services through 2026. They have to be obligated by that date. And then this was just a broad category when it first came out on things we thought we could spend money on, and many administrators had a lot of conversations about each one of those blocks, and ended up, it was difficult to use it in any of those blocks. County Board action to date regarding ARPA, July 20th, 2021, County Board meeting. Approved Resolution 1921, approved Chippewa County American Rescue Plan Act guidelines, procedures for allocating ARPA funds. Everybody struggled with how do we even tackle this? How do we bring it in front of the board? How do we get municipalities involved, citizens involved, all the areas? So the resolutions that were passed in that meeting for 2020, 21, and 22 there were for the telcos. That was one area right from the beginning everybody knew we could spend funds on. So the county board moved forward with those. And then February 8, 2022, approved resolution 422 to amend guidelines, procedures, allocation. This I thought was a really good idea after we started working through the plan. Originally, I presented this as the same as we do CIP, where you just approve the next year and then you have some placeholders. But because of the nature of the plans and the fact that I know it seems like a long time, but March of 2024 isn't that far away, we really had to kind of go to one plan for approval. But by March 2024, any ARPA funds, allocated to a project with the expectation that they're not going to be spent will go back essentially into the ARPA funds. And then I'll bring a resolution forward to reallocate. You guys will decide where you want to put that money. We really, probably the only place you can really do is highway because of the timing and the amount of money that would be available there. But the reason we wanted to implement this is we didn't want to run out of time. If we do it by March 2024, we can spend it during that summer. So February 15th, County Board brainstorming session. We had another one on February 24th. And then March 8th, approved 2 resolutions, again, from 2 telcos. 24/7 did not request to submit anything. They pretty much have done everything they can in our county and kind of moving on to other counties. ARPA plan process to date, 114 department heads submitted draft ideas, county administrator for initial review. 26 projects were submitted by department heads. 127 county administrator held listening session with municipalities. That really turned into, where can they spend their money? And it ended up at this point, we knew that you could use it for roads and you could definitely use it for infrastructure because of the lost revenue count. I think it might have been that same week or maybe the week before the bill came out, Brian. It was right at that time. So Brian was gracious enough to be there and take questions that he had a hard time answering too, because that was brand new. But I think the townships really appreciated it. We had 25 municipalities here, or reps here, so I think that was really good. It's always good to get together with the municipalities and talk with them and see what their thoughts are. We did try to help them in some areas if we could. They had some good ideas. They said, hey, can we spend it here? And then someone in the crowd would say, well, if you can't do that, just spend it in this area and then use those funds for that purpose. So I thought was a good brainstorming session for them too. 2015 County Board brainstorming, 2/15/24/22 County Board brainstorm session. Approved for additional $500,000 for the broadband expansion. That's what we talked about. The county board at that time wanted to allocate. I tried to push them for a number, just because that's a big chunk, and you could really tell that the county board wanted to spend a good chunk of change for highway department. So they did save $7.5 million in the plan, but until a resolution's passed, nothing's final. So tonight, you guys will, look at the plan, but everything's on the table, except for the money, obviously, that's been spent through the resolution. So county administrator present draft plan to executive committee as a report for review on 5/17. And then broadband projects qualified for improvement infrastructure. Again, we knew that right off the bat. So far, the county has approved $2.2 million, which is roughly 17.6%. We do have one agreement signed, sealed, and delivered with 24/7 for the first go-around. We don't have either one, Natera or Bloomer, yet. We're still working on those agreements. This money that the telcos used came from ARPA, from the state side too. So the agreements aren't that difficult. It basically says you have to follow everything that's in ARPA, which is the same thing you're doing for the state, and then requiring some reporting requirements that we have to do in order to qualify for ARPA funds. The difficult with ARPA, which is different than everything we normally deal with, is normally we have to submit a plan. We have to submit a proposal. This is what we want to spend our money on. Then they allocate us the funds. This is just opposite. They gave us the funds, and then they said, here's kind of the guidelines. Come up with ways to spend it. Obviously, that's pretty difficult. You're talking the whole nation. There's a lot of gray areas when you start talking about that. So everybody is very nervous about not spending the money on something that was not eligible. That's why we got Sickage involved. Again, they have full-time staff that just looks at ARPA language. So staff is still working to the remaining telcos to finalize the agreement. The second agreements we did, the resolutions, are not ARPA funded on the state side. They're the regular funding through their program. So we're gonna have to tweak our agreements a little bit, just saying you still have to follow ARPA, but not the same that you do in the state, just on our side. So revenue loss, this really kind of helped everybody out. It was very difficult till we had, and it was not clear when ARPA came out that this was even an option. So we expect that Chippewa County will be able to capture the remaining ARPA funds, about little over $10 million with revenue loss. There's a calculation there that shows this. Originally, they automatically said that you have a 4.1% revenue loss without. That was the standard. So you could do the calculation with 4.1%. And the final rule, all of a sudden the number popped up at 5.2% with no explanation. So we were able to go back and look at what those funds are. And most municipalities will be able to do revenue loss. If you're under $10 million, it's all revenue loss. So if that's the number. If you're over $10 million, you still have to go by those categories or revenue loss. If you're under $10 million, you essentially can spend it on anything you want. WCA is really recommending that revenue loss is something you've already spent tax dollar money on. So it's, you know that you spent the money on it in the past, and you can spend it on in the future. There's some areas that we may not use tax levy on it in the past, but there's projects like clean water. That's a big thing all the way through ARPA. So we know, even though we may not use specific programs or did a specific thing with the township or an individual landowner, those are areas we feel like we can spend money on. Again, we'll get those approved by Sickage before we move forward with those. So this is the plan that was in your packet. It was what went to exec. And then you can see the guidelines on the bottom for that one. And then this is other funding opportunities. So you have 5-year capital improvement plan, projects over $50,000 to allocate. We have bonding. We had that bipartisan infrastructure law that we talked about. Brian has some exciting news that we did receive the first go around of some funds. What was that total dollar amount, Brian?
Just under $1 million.
Just under $1 million, which is amazing because most of the counties in Wisconsin weren't able to even go after that funding. So where did that put us in like the ranking for counties as far as receiving funds?
1 of 4.
1 of 4? So only 4 counties received the money and we received that much. Where did we rank in those 4?
We actually scored 4th, but we had the largest project, so we got the most in the whole state.
Oh, see, I knew it was exciting news. I kind of remember the email, but I remember the details. So that's awesome. And that really comes from, having the staff available. We have an internal engineer, obviously Brian's an engineer, but be able to grab that in, work with an engineering firm. I assume you must have had to bring someone on board pretty quick. That's pretty amazing. So most of this, is all this going to be competitive, Brian? Do we know any more information about that?
We were told some of it's formula based on entitlements, which doesn't make sense because nobody in our district got a project in the second round, so I don't know what they're thinking there.
Okay. But most of it's going to be competitive, basically goes in front of committees and they have to decide who gets it. Yeah, so pretty competitive. So great job there. So next steps, this is what the next steps are. We can do whatever we need to do. I would say we did hand out an updated plan because we had to make some changes. But everything's on the table. The only thing I would recommend is the highway one that's in here and the land conservation forest management one. The timelines, I would really recommend not changing them because we just don't have time to implement the use of the money if that timeline changes for those projects. So is there any question on this? And if there isn't, I'll go over what the new plan, the draft plan is in front of you. You guys probably heard this a couple times already now. So you have the draft plan in front of you. I had that printed out so you guys can actually look at it. I know it can be tough on your iPads to kind of look. You can scribble and take notes. But it's a brainstorming session. So if you look at the top of the general, the synopsis, I guess, or the plan, thanks, Tracy. You'll see the resolutions that have already been passed, the amount of money that's already been allocated. So the total amount is the $2.2 million. So you have roughly $10 million left to allocate. The county board, the previous county board really, I think was very strong on the 7.5 million, I'd say as a minimum, if I read the room right. But they really felt that that's kind of what they've been hearing. That's the feedback that I heard at that brainstorming session. They really heard that from their constituents, that they really want to put money into highway. So that number can change. You can do whatever you want with it. I put these together, and then we also handed out the next one was really just brainstorming between department heads and committees and projects that have come forward. You have an idea what those look like. But again, brainstorming, you can come up with any other ideas you have. If you look at the new draft plan, I did put $500,000 in there for the fire and arm range for lead and EPA remediation. You know, at some point we're going to have to do that, and regardless of what we decide with the range, but there's going to have to be some work done there with that. County board room expansion. This did not go over well with the last board. It's just to be very clear. It's $450,000, which is the estimate. And we do use a firm that gives us estimates on all our construction. They're normally pretty good, but essentially what this project is to blow this wall out and move it about, 30 feet maybe. And Larry would have been here, but he's out fishing in Canada. So first vacation in 2 years, I couldn't make them come back. So everybody kind of felt like that was a hefty price tag. But we have it is pretty crowded in here. It's hard to get people in here. So I honestly don't know what to do with that. But I put it back on there just for conversation purposes. And then there was a couple of projects. I talked to Larry. He had quite a few of them on originally. But a lot of those got removed for other projects. But our facility and parks, if you ever saw the numbers, I don't think the full board's seen the numbers yet, but the committee has the amount of people coming to our parks and staying longer and spending more money. Our revenues are going up, and he really felt this would really help enhance those projects. And then obviously the highway one into $7.5 million. And then the well testing, contaminant mitigation, the $500,000 for land conservation. That isn't vetted out completely yet. The committee's going to be working on that, but we really need to kind of come up with what that plan is. It feels like the well testing's pretty well taken care of. We have a lot of information, a lot of data. Is he a professor that came to UW? UW Stevens Point professor came before the board turned over, and then the last meeting, and gave a presentation on all the information we have. There's 2 websites actually you can go to that actually shows trending on nitrates and several other contaminants. So he said Chippewa County is light years ahead of most counties, if not all. So I feel like we have our testing's looking pretty good. It's just how do we mitigate those moving forward. So they'll be working hard on that. So that's all I have, and then whatever anybody wants to say or do, or I'll take notes.
Randy, I just had a question regarding the well testing and contaminant mitigation. I see it's under land conservation. Is that separate from what public health is going to be doing with water testing?
Yeah, great question. So land conservation forest management for years, I'm probably going to the 80s is that when we started. They had massive well testing. I think originally there was like 700 and some wells they tested, which had nothing to do with what public health is going to take on. That's the public entities like restaurants and those types of things. So they've been doing that for years. And then I'm not exactly sure when Stevens Point came on board to actually take the data and use it and manipulate it. Do you know? 2016. So then they started doing less, but more concentrated, I would say, in the troubled areas. So it's a little different, but that information that is collected by them does go on a statewide database that UW Stevens Point has just for Chippewa County too. So that information also is used, but it's in a different source. Is that correct, Linda? Okay, so those are the two databases. One is what we've collected just on our own through land conservation, forest management. And then the other one is public, that if you get a new well or you have to test a restaurant or that's a separate database and they have information on there.
So the enforcement's probably falls under what, codes or zoning or?
So enforcement's a whole different world. What I understand, here's the way I understand it. If there's a contamination in a well, the DNR will contact public health. Public health can shut that well down and make public notice and that kind of thing. I don't see a whole lot of teeth in any of our ordinances or any state code that allows us to enforce stuff. Land conservation, forest management went through an intensive, long process looking at manure storage and what we could do and couldn't do. And I think at the end of the day, myself included, I think the committee was disappointed that we can only do what the state says we can do. We're not allowed to go above those standards. So the enforcement part in that arena is mostly, my understanding is within the DNR spectrum with them helping. There's also zoning. Obviously, there can be contaminations from human waste, and that's you can only do, again, we can't change the state code. We have to allow what is something's legal, we have to allow it essentially.
I didn't mean to open a can of worms.
No, it's fine. It's a great question, and there's a lot to this, and some of the members in the board have been through a lot of this conversation, so it's really culminated into this ARPA request, and this actually came from the committee. That originally there was two projects. I think one I just didn't qualify, and the other one the committee decided wasn't broad enough. It was pretty narrow in the area. So they really came up with this idea, and so we've been trying to work through some of that and what that exactly looks like at the end of the day. One thing we have talked a lot about is the reporting requirement with some of this, and it can be difficult if it's like each individual well and you got 1,000 wells or you got 500 wells. The reporting side of that for ARPA is pretty intense. We met with zoning, with GIS, and to see if we could get some layers, because there's actually requirements from the census data that we have to provide for each location. So it's better if we can do big projects and not have that intense reporting time, because it's just obviously going to take a lot of time to do that kind of.
Supervisor Steele?
Yeah, just board expansion rule. I was definitely spoke against it last time, and I still am going to vote or against it. I think it's better use of money than making things more comfortable for us. It sends a wrong message to the people in the county. And with that, this is the brainstorm, right?
Yep.
I would like to put a proposal forth, see what the board thinks about it. Is the town of Eau Claire has done something unique by putting a few projects out there and having the public vote on them and rank them. And the highest ones that are ranked get done. And I think it involves the public, it offers transparency, and it's maybe something this board ought to look at instead of that county boardroom expansion.
Okay, anyone want to speak?
Now, we're not voting and putting things forward.
No, just
brainstorm.
Supervisor Steele.
Steve?
Does that
Supervisor?
for ARPA usage, if we were to open something up to the public?
I think what he's talking about more is like process than actual projects. I think if I understand Supervisor Steele correctly, he'd want like whatever we come up with the final plan to put it out to the public for a vote, and they would rank where they want to spend the money. I don't know if they're talking about how much, but at least the ranking, let's say we'd give them 10 projects, they would rank them or something like that, if that's what you, I think it's talking more process. We would still have to determine that they qualify before we'd give it to them, because we wouldn't want to say.
From what I gather, I think that the city council or whoever it was put $300,000 in a fund. It said, okay, this project could take 15,000, this would take 20,000, this would take, you know, and get a bunch of projects, 50,000, whatever, and put it out to the public and have them grade them 1 through whatever. And the ones that get the most response would be the projects that are done, voted on by the public.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So Supervisor Steele, are you saying they only took like a portion of their ARPA, whatever, I don't know what their total dollar amount, but then came up with some projects within that?
Yeah, they go within that fund. So in other words, like I said, this county boardroom is 450,000. You know, I mean, be a pretty good start.
Supervisor Hull?
Yeah, I'm kind of against the money for the boardroom expansion, but the other side of the coin, I think, it wasn't for comfort. I think the main thing is we have something contentious here that the public wants to come and attend, and we're kind of out of room for them to attend. I think that was probably the biggest intent of expanding. If you look at now, you know, we don't really have much room for public here. Again, I think I'm against spending that money on it, but just to add to it, I think that was part of the intention, if I get it right, is.
I would agree.
Because there's really no place for the public to come here anymore.
Supervisor Bergeron?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I like the idea. I love the public input idea. The only piece that I would throw out with that is the city of Eau Claire did that and they had a great response to it. But all the people who vote on that, it's a different dynamic in terms of everyone who voted in the city of Eau Claire lives in the city of Eau Claire. I live in a rural-ish, not as rural as some of our northern supervisors, but just know that wherever the population is in Chippewa County is going to win those votes. So it's probably down to about 3 or 4 district opportunity if we go that route but I like the idea, if we can frame it where maybe we section off, I don't know, open for conversation. I like the idea, but if we just leave it, popular vote, there's about 4 districts that have a real chance of winning a popular vote for project. Something to throw out there. Think about if we would go that way, how would we organize it?
Dean Mueller?
Yeah.
Supervisor.
Not to cross sabers with you, Buck, but my understanding of what Eau Claire did was, I believe they said they had a certain amount of money, and they were asking the public for input for projects to spend that money on, which is a little different than us coming up with projects and asking them to rank it. I mean, maybe that's a little, that was my understanding of what Eau Claire did. I wasn't there in their meetings or anything, but I was kind of scratching my head when I saw the news story. And that was my understanding, and I thought, well, if they can do that, great, I guess, but I wasn't sure that it was, quite the same animal here, but that's about all I have to say on that, so next batter.
Yeah. Supervisor Teuteberg?
I think, I like the idea, but I think in the interest of simplicity, maybe keep numbers off the public voting, and just go with like what projects would you be interested in? Then ultimately, obviously, this board would have the final say. But I think it's a good idea to keep it transparent and to get public input. And maybe we limit the number of projects to 3, 4, 5, whatever, that affect the entire county, maybe aren't just more beneficial to a certain area if we can do that. Because I think Supervisor Bergeron has a good point that you're going to have large populous centers who are going to obviously dominate that vote. So I think if we come up with a list of 3, 4, 5 very simple projects that could be very beneficial to the county,
Got a clarifying question. Do you know how they put it out? How they did it? Did they do a survey? Did they ask them to?
I have no idea.
I know there were listening sessions involved, but I don't know how the final tally or what exactly the final determining factor was. They held multiple listening sessions throughout the different areas in Eau Claire.
I would suggest not doing a Facebook poll.
Supervisor Sikorsky?
Just looking back at our last term, I just, everybody overwhelmingly supported putting the money in the roads. And I know we have a large pot going there, but it affected the most population of the county. And then, of course, the strong second was internet. And we just need to remember that try and affect the whole county evenly.
Does anybody have concern?
Anyone else?
7.5? Is that too high a number, too low a number? Do you guys feel comfortable with that still? Like I said, the last board, that's kind of where they landed, but it was a good discussion to get there, so.
Supervisor Hunt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To answer your question, did we get justification for the 7.5 million?
Justification?
I mean, I'm sorry, what was rewarded, was that the 7.5 or is that?
7.5 is just from the ARPA. Yep, and it qualifies under lost revenue. Yep, we know that. Yep.
So that part's good, but my actual question was, it has to do with I know we talked a little bit at our last meeting about possibly when we're looking at the range and, using the 500,000 for lead and EPA remediation, is it possible to use these funds for maybe some sort of a co-op or some sort of a cooperative agreement with other counties to support the training of our law enforcement, whether that's through, if they have to go down south to train, supporting them through the transportation costs, or if we, funnel some of the funds towards a range.
Right. Definitely new range would qualify. It's a building construction, something we spend money on all the time. One of the criteria we had was not trying to spend the money towards continuous operational expenses because it's going to run out. So it probably would.
Term until a new range is in place.
Yep. Yeah, it'd go till the 2024 deadline. It wouldn't qualify for 2026. It's not a contract.
Right.
But yeah, I think you could use it for that. You'd have to double check, but from what I understand, I think you could.
Supervisor McGill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to putting something out to the public, I think the logistics of that would be enormous. And second of all, we're all duly voted and representatives of our constituents. So it's our job to make a decision based upon what we feel our constituents really want and what best serves the county. So I don't think it's a situation where we gotta go out every time and get a straw poll. I mean, that's work that you'd be doing typically on a monthly or daily basis with your constituents. Nobody better knows the feeling of your district than you yourself. And you've proven that, that's why you're here.
One thing we could do, we do it during the budget, we could do a public hearing. It gives the public opportunity to come and speak on the plan and give input. That way you don't have to do the logistics part of it, but we do it for the budget, which gets nobody here, but if it's important to them, they'll show up. I know that, but that's a thought.
Supervisor Boar?
I'm going to agree with Supervisor Sikorsky on the idea of gaining the most bang for the most buck so that people across the county feel like they've been equally supported. Because it would be great to put all of that money in Lafayette Township. That would be. But that wouldn't behoove well for all of your constituents. So my belief is that, timing is an issue, even through going through all of these sounding boards. Timing's become, and the more we drag this out, the more compressed our timing gets. So that becomes problematic. And my question with $7.5 million with roads, the number one complaint I've heard from everyone in every county I've ever been are roads. That's an oversimplification. The only concern I have is if we up that to 10, 20, or $30 million, is there crew, staff, and supplies and supply chain to get those roads done in a timely fashion?
Yeah, so the max, we can't go that high. Even if we wanted to, the max we could go is 10,340,000. That's all we got left. So.
Yeah.
I'll let Brian.
But we could spend 30.
Real easy.
Yeah, easy.
Well, I think we've been kind of in a falling behind pattern for so long with doing 7 to 10 miles a year. Our crews are chomping at the bit to do more. We just don't have the money to do it. And we've made some significant investments in our asphalt plant this last winter, so that thing is in really good shape. We bought a new cat paver a couple of years ago. That thing runs really well. We just got a whole new paving crew working together really well. So I think everything's there that we can do a lot more mileage. We just don't have the funds to do it.
Okay. Supervisor Erickson?
Couple things. As a well-seasoned veteran on the county board, I was here for 3 months.
Very well.
Yeah, really. When we were having these meetings with the last board, I mean, the only thing we could really come together on was roads and broadband. And I think there's just been some excellent points brought up about where the population is. Can we handle it if we spend the money? If anybody does have any more questions about how Eau Claire did it, you just Google Empower Eau Claire and it gives you a complete rundown on how they did it. And like I said, I just really feel that the roads and the broadband were very important. I think we've got them addressed and we've got to just move forward on the rest of the spending. I don't think we should take anything away from roads right now.
Thank you. Supervisor Tudenberg?
So just to clarify, the telecommunications is at 2.2 million?
2.2 million, 2.2 million.
The roads are 7.5, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we can start moving this forward, I guess. Can we do like a show of hands or just a voice for something to say, are we good with those numbers now? And then what does that leave us after the 2.2 plus 7.5? What would that leave us to come up with? Ballpark.
The 2.2 is already spent. You don't make any decisions about that.
Right.
What you have to work right now is that bottom number, the 10,349,103. That's the number that you have available.
So you take the
minus the 7.5.
Take away the 7.5.
So what number is that? I used to be a financial crimes investigator. Embarrassing.
I'll get a quick.
3.8, does that sound right?
No, 2.8.
2.8.
2,800,000, 2.8.
2.8.
Roughly, yep.
Okay, so, and Mr. Supervisor, I don't know if we want to just kind of use that as a jumping off point to solidify, unless you want to have more conversation about what the 7.5 is good, bad, or otherwise. It sounds like that was pretty agreed upon by the former board.
Supervisor Hull?
Yeah, just one more clarification. You mentioned how you can Google Eau Claire. Just to clarify, they had listening sessions for public input, but they didn't take votes from the public. You don't do that. They invited the public for listening sessions early on, I think, to get ideas that maybe the board couldn't think of. I think that was their intention. You know what I mean? Which we're kind of late in the process for that, because I think they did that back in the last year, right? There were 2 or 3 of them. I mean, if you look at them, you can see their public notices for them. But anyway, the idea of the public voting on what we do, I don't really think they went to that point. You can see how that would, just to clarify.
Supervisor Steele?
Yeah, I brought that up and probably overspoke what was the actual process. I couldn't really tell you the process, but it definitely involved the people, and they had a chance to rank them. Now, I'm all in favor of listening sessions. I mean, as long as we involve the people. Everybody says that courthouse is its own identity. Let's change it. That's what we're supposed to do.
Supervisor Ives?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a clarifying question. We talked about this before. Did we vote, was there more than the 7.5 to the highway? If there was leftover or something, we would vote on giving that remaining balance to the highway or something?
Yeah, we talked about that March. That's where that March date for 2024 came up. And what we said is, if there's money left over, really the only place we can really get to is highway because of timing. And if you look at the updated plan, there is about $924,000 set aside for contingency. We originally wanted about 10% contingency, because of the rising prices, and then it fell below, and Brian built some of that into some of his estimates. But I mean, even since then, the last 3 months have been insane I can't imagine what prices are right now. So we should have some kind of contingency regardless of, what you guys finally decide on, just because we always want to make sure we have enough for the projects.
Supervisor Schmidt?
I would like to see the $500,000 for land conservation and nitrate issues kept in there for the time being. This is relatively new number and allotment, and we haven't had time to fully find a efficient and worthwhile way to spend it. We hope that there is. We do have a nitrate issue. I know Supervisor Bishop is a new member of the committee, and he wasn't aware of the nitrate issues that we have in the county, and we do need to deal with this somehow, but that looks like we're not real sure yet. But this would go a ways to helping us.
Supervisor Sikorsky?
I just wanted to bring up I was at the listening session when all the towns were here, and 95% of the conversation was the roads. I mean, that was the whole focus of the meeting.
Yep, absolutely.
Supervisor Bishop?
I'm a little unclear what we're brainstorming now, so we're not gonna take any votes on this tonight, is that correct?
No, we typically don't. I hear what you guys are saying, and then I try to bring that forward. So that's the plan. Because basically what I'm hearing is you guys want things that affect the whole county, and bringing those forward to the county board. Can I get some feedback just on the bathrooms? If you guys think that's a good plan. I mean, it does affect a lot of the county, a lot of people, obviously everybody can use them. Do you guys feel like that's a good allocation of resources for ARPA?
You just read my mind, that's why I pushed the button.
Oh,
right? Okay.
Sorry, Chair.
Okay. When I look at the room expansion, the bathrooms, and the bathrooms, and I see those dollar amounts, and I know we've been using a specific contractor group or whatever, it's kind of like your auto insurance. It keeps creeping up and up and up if you use this, and when you switch to a different company, sometimes you save a ton of money. And I wonder if we shouldn't look elsewhere for bids on that. I don't know about you, when I see this wall and moving it back costing $450,000, I just cannot swallow that. And the same when I look at the bathroom, and I'm familiar with these parks, and I look at Otter Lake, $325,000 for a bathroom? Wow.
Just for clarification, Chair, these aren't bids. These are
Or
estimates from architects.
That's correct.
How much it costs. So they don't make any money off what the cost is.
Okay.
They try to come up with dollar amounts, come up with that. I know, I don't understand the 450,000 like everybody else. And I put it on there just because I wanted to see the comfort level as far as where the county board was and not being able to have the public in here and spending that kind of money. Does it justify it or not? I'm hearing not. So it probably doesn't fly again, but I just wanted the new board to have an opportunity because we didn't have this setting before. I mean, there were fewer people here. We did have a little more room for the public, but not much. We do have an ability to set up an overflow room downstairs, which we've done in the past. It's a little awkward and, not how we like it. Obviously, you want everybody in the room so everybody can see everybody talk. But I just wanted to see where that landed.
Okay. My last comment on that is to concur with Supervisor. We just had a lengthy meeting discussing an issue that is creeping up on this board with law enforcement training, shooting ranges. And so when I look at what we have in that 925 or 924, 103 that we have left over, would go a long, long ways in solving that problem. And that's it. Supervisor Teuteberg.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree 100%. I think that the range issue is going to be contentious regardless of whatever way it goes. Just you're going to have some very set persons, and I think that if we were to look at building or moving towards a new location with upgraded facilities, that would not only help mitigate the blowback from the closing of the obviously very popular range, as it was popular, but also does check that box for our law enforcement community as well and give them another opportunity for training. I think it hits a lot of good points if we were to look at the cost of building another range.
Thank you. Supervisor Bergeron.
In talking to the bathrooms at the Otter Lake and the Pine Point Park campgrounds, I think our park system and campground system really is a gem. And as you referenced there, it's creating revenue for the county. So I really would appreciate those staying on there. I've nothing completely open to
I agree.
competitive bids. I agree.
Oh, yeah.
We could probably get them better than that. But into all intents and purposes of what we're looking at tonight, I definitely am a fan of the campground system we have, and it's really is a gem for the county. I guess I could do without the board expansion, even, especially at that price tag. But I mean, we've come a long way in the county the last few years with the videos and the live streaming and opportunities. And, I never want to say that, obviously, if a lot of people want to come, we need to figure out a way to allow them to participate. But I can count on one hand in the other 4 years I was on the board that we ever had a scenario where there was that kind of reaction. So, and I would concur with Supervisor Schmidt that even though there's not an exact plan in place, this is an incredible opportunity to try to get, make some ground on the nitrate issue in the county for the money and land conservation. So I would definitely love to see that stay there.
Thank you.
Supervisor Steele.
Just to give the board a little explanation, they say $325,000 for the bathroom at Otter Lake. If Larry was here, I'm gonna say the bathroom at Pine Point Park was about $250,000.
Almost, Lori's just mouthing, how much was that?
350,000 for that shower, bathroom.
It's not just stools, it's showers, storage room, all kinds of stuff. So it might have been, but everybody says 300 and a quarter is out of sight, but we spent it before. The other thing I would like to talk about is the public firing range. If we're gonna put some money, I'm all for it, but only thing this board has talked about is for the police to use it. If the public can't go there, I'm not interested. Because the police, they've already trained somewhere else. So, to do static and what's the other one?
I always forget it. Tactical.
Tactical.
I always forget it.
Technical training, you just bumped the range $1 million.
Supervisor Bishop.
Going along with that, I would hope that if we put money towards a range, it would be public, and I would expect that would be. That is also an opportunity for the county to earn some money back through cooperation with surrounding counties. That could be a revenue in the future that we could consider. I'd even be in favor of putting the 450 from the boardroom expansion into the 924 for contingency, and maybe using that for the firing range.
Supervisor Erickson.
When we had 29 members, I don't know how many years ago that was, but where did you meet when you had 29 members?
I don't know.
I can answer that. I was on the last 29-member board. We had the tables like we had prior to these new ones in your desks, and 2 members sat at each table. So the line where Chuck is, maybe it was.
But was it this room?
Yeah, this room, yes, definitely. But when you put 2 tables together and you, like this, you gain a lot of space real fast.
And the other comment that I had is, you've got to keep these facilities up to date, like as far as the parks are concerned. My wife's idea of roughing it, staying at a 3-year-old Holiday Inn. So, gotta keep up with this stuff. It is revenue producing, and we've got to keep up with that kind of stuff.
Okay. I'm going to agree with you, Supervisor Steele and Supervisor Bishop. I think, yes, we have to have all 3 entities there. We have to have the public, the hunter education, and the law enforcement. And I also agree that there is revenue gaining potential there, especially if we had the tactical also available. Supervisor Ives.
Yeah, I just had a question, because, it doesn't make sense to spend the money to expand this, but if it got voted for, isn't Health and Human Services already short staff, like short office space?
No.
To fit anymore? Okay.
No.
'Cause I thought that at one point in time there was.
There was, yeah, several people work from home now. Since COVID, we have a, what's that policy? Teleworking policy, yeah. Several of them work from home. Yep.
And may I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
Something that was no till we revisit it. Like, I was just thinking, where a lot of us are talking, or a lot of people are talking about how the tourism and a lot of people come and visit our parks and everything. And, one thing really stinks is to go to a park and sit on a rackety old park or picnic table or get a sliver up your, so, could we maybe revisit getting some of those picnic tables updated in the parks if we have any extra funding?
Yeah, I believe that was on the long list, right, at one point?
Yeah. Okay. Supervisor Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Carrie actually hit on part of what I was going to talk about regarding the parks and tourism. Is the Tourism Bureau any kind of an entity that the county could in some way work with, grant-wise or anything like that?
Yeah, it would have to. So right now, we give some money to tourism to do their what they do. So they'd have, if there was some kind of project, then they would have to come up with that and submit it and do that type of work. So, and it'd have to be something we spent money on in the
Tourism
past.
agency is not a government entity in itself, is that what you're?
You probably know this better than I do, Jackie. It's through the Chamber of Commerce, part of the Chamber of Commerce, correct?
Partnership with
So-
them, but I don't, like, we contract. We contract with
Okay.
them, because they do like the marketing for, I think, like the parks and stuff, like, I know there's like some contract.
Sorry, I don't know enough about that.
Okay,
Supervisor.
so I was just wondering if there was some,
That's up to the chair.
mechanism where, I wasn't sure if there was a Department of Tourism. I guess I hadn't looked into them that far.
Yeah, what it talks about in ARPA is, originally anyways, was it had to be like a tourism hotel, or it had to be a tourism location where it lost funding and that kind of thing. The lost revenue definitely does open that up more. It would have to be something that we spend money on with some kind of contracted service, because we can't just give money. We're not allowed, counties aren't allowed to give money to nonprofits unless there's a contractual agreement between us for some kind of service.
I was wondering about getting money from the Tourism Bureau for those projects. That's, I wasn't.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's why I was asking.
Okay.
We were actually a government entity that took taxpayer dollars.
Okay. Okay. We'll go to Supervisor Teutenberg, and then we will have our person who sits on tourism help answer that. So Supervisor Teutenberg.
Thank you. I think that obviously the range, if we were to go that route, should be open to both law enforcement and the public. And again, I think that's been expressed. I would also support keeping the bathroom projects, those upgrade on there, as well as the well testing and mitigation. And I would think, again, to reiterate what you had said, that if we find an extra 20, 30,000 in those bathroom projects, I don't know why we couldn't have that put towards picnic tables, to upgrade those as well. But my last comment would be towards the range with other counties. What's the feasibility of working with neighboring counties who also have their own funds that they're looking at spending right now? Kind of a strike while the iron's hot time, that if they're having the same conversations that we are right now, maybe we need to get on the, well, it used to be a phone, now it's email. And hey, this is what we're looking at. What are your thoughts on this? And what do we need to bring this together? Tri-county or quad-county area project.
Yeah, I definitely have good relationships with all the surrounding counties. Not a problem.
Okay. Supervisor Steele.
Just to give you an explanation about the Tourism Council. Tourism Council is actually a subsidy of the Chippewa Falls Chamber of Commerce. So the Chippewa Falls Chamber of Commerce gives the Tourism Council some money to work with, and our county does. And we have one county board member on the Tourism Council, which is myself, last 2 years, and then 2 years coming up. As far as money available, you can't get blood out of a term. But that's the way it's set up.
I consider myself educated.
Okay. And to answer Supervisor Teutenberg's question, I have already requested the sheriff make contacts to feel that issue out.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Supervisor Eisenhuth?
Thanks, Chair. I might as well get my 2 cents in. Doing everybody else's. How much money we got? 2.8?
About 2.8 if you kept it just sounds like the boardroom's going off the rails, so 3.299 is if you added that back in there.
Well, I'm in favor of the range. We're gonna have to do something with that anyway. So that 500 should stay, and I'm thinking the well testing is 500. If you keep the park bathrooms, you got like 1.5 million, and it gives us like $700,000 that we can put in the contingency fund and keep those on the board. That's my thoughts.
Supervisor Romeyer?
In regard to the well testing and contamination mitigation, this might be a premature question, Randy, but would you envision that how that would be allocated is that if people are having problems with contaminated wells and so on, then they make some type of application to the county and there'd be some kind of help available that they'd have to apply for? Would that be kind of the general idea?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, I think the conversation's revolving around prevention, doing cover crops, stuff like the stuff I know nothing about. So I'm just trying to, Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, doing having an area that we know is a high nitrate area and then working with those farmers to have cover crops. And that costs money. I understand you can fly over and seed that. So there are some counties that are actually doing something like that. So that would be a much broader, it'd be a big expense, obviously, but you'd cover a much broader area. And then there has been the conversation, and there is a county, Rock County, that's looking at doing something that you just talked about. They have high contaminants in a well. They actually have some criteria, like if you have young children, that kind of thing, and then you'd have to submit an application. Obviously, administratively, that gets very complicated, but it's something we can do for sure. I don't think the committee settled on anything right now. They're still kind of working that out. The professor really talked about, he talked about a lot of things, which was fascinating, but he talked about well depth, casing depth. If you're having high contaminants in an area, do you put a well in? Obviously, reverse osmosis is a big thing, but then there's maintenance and stuff like that. So I think the committee's still struggling with some of those ideas.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Anyone else?
I appreciate it. I heard you loud and clear, so we'll come back with
New board.
another play. Yeah. Boy, I got a great idea for a boardroom. Will not see that again from me.
Maybe picnic tables in the boardroom. Huh? Okay. I want to thank everybody for the good participation. Agenda items for future consideration. If you have some, make sure you get them to me, and we'll get it scheduled. One of the board meetings coming up. So hopefully fewer board meetings than we've been having. Other than that, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
Supervisor Hunt, motion to adjourn.
Okay. Is there a second? Oh. Okay, I guess we got to push the buttons. So, in favor, press 3.
Call the vote.
18 yes.
Good.